right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're excited to enter into Exodus. Exodus is actually Greek, meaning departure or going out. And in the Hebrew, it is Shemoth, which means the names. And it's interesting as we start where it's a continuation of Genesis, because we looked at Genesis, as the beginning, the creation, the beginning, the origins, right? We see the origin of everything. All that we can think of throughout Scripture, all that we can think of throughout life has its origin, has its beginning in Genesis. So we look at Genesis, the book of Genesis, as creation, the beginnings. We look at the book of Exodus as the redemption of the people that would be Yah's, the Israelites. And we juxtapose those two things together because there's parallels between Egypt, bondage, Pharaoh, and ultimately sin. Pharaoh being an example of the adversary, and Israel being in bondage, Egypt. And ultimately that is sin as we look at it. And then we see the deliverance. We see Moshe being the deliverer. And also we see he is a type of Yahusha who ultimately delivers us. But we also see the redemption through his blood. And all that is introduced to us here as we walk through the Israelite story as our story. And we see throughout Scripture what it's saying. Romans 15:4 tells us that all things are written aforetime, are written for our learning, and we have to see what those things are specifically now. As we look to see what it is Yah wants us to do. The message this morning was interesting in the sense that it talked about Yah's anger. Well, here we see the people that Yah was angry at. We see the actions of the people. We see the deliverance of the people. We also see the failings of the people throughout this book. So we're gonna really look through this and dissect it. And as we enter in this beginning, the beginning of this book of Exodus is 300 years later from the end of Genesis, 300 years after Joseph dies, and then we see another 100 years for the life of Moses before they're actually delivered, or 80 years. But the question we ask, is why is Israel in this predicament? Why do we find Israel here in Egypt? Why did Yah allow this cruelty to happen? So we'll look at, before we start, where that origin is in the book of Genesis, chapter 15. Genesis 15, verse 13 says this. Then he said to Abraham, know certainly, that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve, I will judge. Afterward, they shall come out with great possessions. So we see that Yahuwah told Abraham that this would happen. So prophetically speaking, this is where we are in the book of Exodus. So we're going to split this first chapter up and we'll read the first 11 verses. So who wants to take the first 11 verses of the book of Exodus, chapter 1? I knew it, Brother JP. I started to call your name. Beat me to it. Go ahead, brother.
Exodus chapter 1 says, Now these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt. Every man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses.
And when you started, you sounded like the audio Bible. Exodus chapter 1.
Yeah,
Go ahead, brother.
I guess, one thing when I read this, it just reminds me as I read the rest of scripture, that over time, if you don't pass, I mean, me as a parent now, as a dad, if I don't pass the understanding to my son, information and knowledge, then it can definitely depart from him or from my family, from my genealogy. And so as the first 6 verses show, that all of the main heads of those tribes, they died away. And so, and then in 7 it says, and the children of Israel are fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied. So at this point you have like a second generation, like it's like this next generation in the sense of with knowledge and wisdom from their fathers. And then as I read through scripture, I always remember like, wow, like it was so much time that went by that they throughout scripture, I'm saying throughout the whole Bible, that why they dealt with moving and like we were talking about today, they go to other mighty ones, they start to fall away. And so I'm just saying that it's important that we continue to guide our family and our friends and showing them how to teach their children so that they can stay in the way. So that's what, and I know that's just what it brought me to, though. So.
Yeah, no, that's very good. You see, Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema, we are to teach our children these things, we are to raise them in the full understanding of the scripture. I think it was Emeka earlier that brought out Deuteronomy where it says, this is your life. Yahuwah's word is life, choose life. And, there is a difference between what the world teaches and what Yah teaches. There is a significant difference. We're going to see later when we look at the maidens, the who was it? The the women that delivered the babies. What were they called?
The midwives.
Yes, the midwives. We'll see how they take a stance, and they get an edict from Pharaoh, but yet they don't allow the edict to supersede Yah's word, Yah's law, right? So there's a difference in what the world offers and what Yah offers, and I think there is a consistent siding of Egypt being a representation of the world, a representation of sin, Pharaoh being the leader, being the adversary, and what is that juxtaposed beside? Yah's law, Moshe as deliverer, ultimately Yahusha being the deliverer. So we'll see those two things side by side throughout. Yah always saying, stay away from those things. When we look at the law, a lot of the things that we see when it starts talking about our instructions, haircuts, and the way that they were dressing, all of those things were tied into false worship of deities, not to emulate those things because they led to, it was a funnel to worshiping another God. So we have to be mindful of what JP said, is to teach our children this way, not the world's way. So a very good point. But I liked, the Hebrew of Shemoth, the names, and then it says, these are the names. This is the tribes. These are the tribes. These are the names of the heads of the families of the Israelites, now and forever. So this is who our ancestors are. Those who believed, those who followed, those are our true ancestors, because we follow Yahuwah's laws, statutes, and commandments. So these are the names of our true ancestors. And then it breaks down the tribes as we see. But what I found interesting was where it says, now there arose a new king over Egypt, and that did not remember Joseph. So a lot of things happened in between this time. Remember, it's 400 years. There were entrances of other kings into Egypt that weren't Egyptian. There were wars going on, different dynasties, and you have the Middle Kingdom and the Hyksos period, because remember, there was a Hyksos king at one point. The Hyksos dynasty went from 1730 to 1570 BC. And, according to scripture and according to history, Moshe would have been born in Exodus 2 right around 1527 BC, which lines them up with the Thutmose 1, Thutmose 2, and Amenhotep was also one of the Egyptian kings at that time. So these are the people that probably were around in that time. And what I found as a very good tool, and I'm gonna offer it to you guys. It's and I don't even think I bought this book. I think this was a book that June had from college, but it's the Oxford History of the Biblical World. So check it out, the Oxford History of the Biblical World, edited by Michael D. Coonan. So this book takes biblical history, but it also lines it up with literary and historical character from the Exodus narrative. So, but this goes from Genesis to the fall of Rome, and it's a very good tool to help line history up with the Exodus account as we see in Scripture. So you guys might want to check that out as we go through Exodus, to give us a understanding of what was going on at that time. But when it says a new king, this is also looked at as a different type of king. So he was different So whether it was belief, whether it was understanding, whatever it was, totally separated him from the understanding of who these Israelites were. They didn't care about them anymore. You know, they had no loyalty to them anymore. They had loyalty to Joseph. You know, those and the generation of those that knew them were gone. You know, so they looked at the Israelites completely different than Pharaoh was at that time. So, Sister Linda, then JP, and then Brother Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot here that was really speaking to me. You know, as we're looking at this, you know, there's only a few Aleph Taus, but I will definitely touch those. But seeing that the first one here is basically just pointing out that, you know, the Aleph Tav before Jacob and Exodus 1:1 at the end when he's naming the children of Yasharal. You know, like you said, this is our kin. This is the tribes here that are being announced that they came with Aleph Tav Jacob. So it's pointing out the covenant that's from Jacob that's upon, you know, these tribes here. And then, as you pointed out, it says there arose a new king in Mitzrayim that didn't know Joseph, and right there he said he knew not Aleph Tav Joseph, so he didn't know this covenant relationship. So he stepped into something that and basically superseded. And as you were saying, you know, they didn't have any need. They actually had a fear now of the Yisraelites because they were so many. You know, they outnumbered them, and they had concern that they would have, you know, being overtaken from within. So now they go ahead and they take them into slavery, you know, and put them into this bondage, basically putting people over them and mistreating them. You know, it's interesting when you start seeing that how that began this process, and then you see the placement of these two left Tavs here at the end are interesting because they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Aleph Tav, Pitnam, and Aleph Tav Ra'amat. So at the end of it, there's actually some type of covenant symbol that's being put on these. Maybe it's because they built them in some sense, or this had something that started this covenant that he had to get his people out of there. I don't know what that could represent, but it's an interesting placement as goes into looking at, you know, those Aleph Tavs, you know, because, you know, as we see, they always have some kind of purpose there. And why would they have them over these cities that they built for these pharaohs, you know, or for this pharaoh? So those are the things that stuck out to me. But that concern that he had, that fear of the people, you know, brought him into this bondage. And I guess this is part of the structure of this, you know, the bondage of the tribes, you know, where he's going to start to do this covenant with them. Maybe that's where it has to do, because it's talking about them building this for this Pharaoh, you know. There's a purpose there, but I guess maybe we'll find out as we go along, but that's what I seen.
Yeah, so it says in verse 11, they set before them taskmasters. These taskmasters were the chief of the slave gangs. They basically ran the slave gangs. But then it says Pithom and Ramses. Those were two cities they put up, and they said they were store cities. But it also says historically that these were two military cities that were set up to guard because of the Hyksos dynasty came in. These kings, they were taking over the Egyptians. So the two cities, military cities, were put there to protect not only the Pharaoh, but the people of Egypt. So that's what those two cities were.
Another thing too, on that 70, that stuck out to me, the number that came out with 70. You know, there's always a significance to these numbers, and you know, as we look at the 70s throughout Scripture, there was meaningful. You know, there was 70 elders appointed by Moses. You know, after reading the covenant, Moses took 70 elders along with him and Aaron and the sons up to Mount Sinai. You know, they have that special meal with Yahuwah. You know, ancient Israel spent a total of 70 years in captivity in Babylon. You know, 70 years is specific with Jerusalem as well, you know, with keeping the Sabbaths, the 70 Sabbaths, you know, the Vedas, I think, yeah. While Yehuda was in Babylon, you know, there's that same that they're keeping there. The 77s of the 490 years were determined upon Jerusalem. So there's some connectivity to this number 70 that was taken in, you know, that came in with him, you know. So that's something maybe for us to zone into a little bit on.
Absolutely. 70. Sister Linda, JP, and then Emeka.
When they left Egypt, they departed from Ramses. That's where they departed from. That's where they started their journey back after the years of the 430 years of that they were in Egypt. But what I wanted to point out was pertaining to what you were talking about earlier, 1 and 8. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Isaiah, I had it a minute ago. Isaiah, the 52nd, I think it's the 52nd chapter. Let me get it real quick. A 52nd chapter and the 4th verse says, "For thus saith my sovereign Yahuah, my people went down aforetime into Egypt to sojourn there, and the Assyrian oppressed them without cause." So this particular king was of an Assyrian. I just want to mention that because you were talking about it was a different type of dynasty and all of that, and that pretty much verifies that during that time, this was the one that knew not Joseph. He was of the Assyrians. Praise Yah.
That's correct. Thank you, sis. JP.
Yeah, just to add what Sister Linda was speaking about right now, because that's what I was going to talk about as well, because I thought that was interesting. And what I did is when I look in the Strong's Concordance, it says Asher, H804 in Isaiah 52:4. It says Asher, and then it says apparently from 833 in the sense of successful. It says Asher, the second son of Shem, also his descendants, and the country occupied by them, that is Assyria. So I thought that was pretty interesting, just to kind of bring into like a context of who it was. But also in Acts chapter 7, verse 18, you know, it does, I just want to reference that as well. Till another king arose, which knew not Joseph. The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children to the end they might not live. And I just found it, what I want to say, just from my own personal comment, is that I feel like it's like for us today, you know, when they see that the people are growing and they see that the body is becoming strong, they try to weaken us. You know what I mean? They want to try to bring us down. And so there's a lot of, when it comes to Hasatan and, you know, his, you know, I don't know what you would call them, demons or, you know, whatever it is, but that evil spirit that's out there comes and starts attacking us on a personal level, you know, to try to knock us down. We got to remember, again, to stay full armored up and continue to walk and guard his commandments. And because that's what's going to happen, right? Persecution is going to happen. So I see the same situation continuing to happen, just like it is right here, you know. So just want to bring that up. I thought that was interesting to see it in that perspective, that, you know, when they see us multiplying, they're going to come at us, you know. So stay guarded. Shalom.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up that Acts verse, because I'm actually going to speak about that later when we go into chapter 2. But it's very important that you brought that up, because, you know, each time, you know, because when we look at that word, a different king, it's it's more than just a different king like somebody else. It's a different type. It's a different kind, so it's coming from the mindset of those he was with. So if he was Assyrian, if he was if someone that fled over from the Hyksos dynasty, they were different. You know what I mean? They had a different mindset, and the people followed because they were ruling. So very important to point that out. Appreciate that, Sister Linda and JP. Emeka, and then Hoppy.
Yeah, so I know when we were reading Genesis and we're talking about Joseph and his him being sold into slavery. I think I think you brought out something about him being around like 17 years old or 18 years old. I think when that happened.
Yeah.
Is it okay? So would it be safe to say that at that point when he was sold over, that for those 92, 93 years, that was the beginning of Yasharal, that was the beginning of Yah's word to Abraham being fulfilled, because at that point, that's when Abraham's seed started to serve Egypt, started to serve Mitzrayim at that point,
Well, but then I mean, I see where you're going. I think you're right in that that's the entrance of the Israelites going into Egypt, because he was the reason they ended up there in the first place. But the actual serving that Yah mentions in chapter 15 is what we see now as they become slaves, because it was it was a hardship for them. It was they were being afflicted, and I think that ties into them being slaves, not so much when Joseph was there, because Joseph, became the prime minister, the grand vizier. So, but he was the beginning of this time entering in. Absolutely, for sure.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to bring that out, because even when you do look at his time, he was, I think, I forgot what duty he had before, because it was something he was doing before he became the prime minister to Pharaoh.
Yeah, he was leading in Potiphar's house. He was the head guy at Potiphar's house. Yeah.
Okay, and then he went from there, and then he went into serving in the dungeon, and so because of the whole incident with Potiphar's wife and everything, so then he went into basically being a prisoner. So I just thought that was kind of and we speak about affliction, like she was an affliction for him somewhat. She was a temptation for him, that he it was sin knocking at the door. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting, because that would definitely add some time to the count, because I think hopefully we can get a count on how long. That's what I'm interested in trying to find out now, is how long they were actually serving in Egypt. But yeah, we can definitely continue. I know we'll continue looking at these things, but I thought that was interesting.
So okay. So your main focus on that comment was to clarify the accurate count of the time versus what Yah is saying to them in Genesis 15. So you're
I want to make sure that I want to line the two up so that we can get an accurate count between the time that if it's an accurate count between the time Joseph goes in and between the time that Yisra'el comes out. If that lines up with the 400 years that he says in Genesis 15.
Yeah, we can look at that. We'll look at that. That's an interesting study. Sis, what is your name? Is it your name is Sister Poppy or Sid?
My name is Poppy.
Okay.
Sid's just sitting on my lap.
Sid. Okay.
She's
All
my
right.
granddaughter.
All right. Cool. Go ahead,
So,
sis.
she just went back upstairs. I'm actually going backwards here. I hope you don't mind. But when you were talking about the number 70, you were talking about the elders and other stuff. But also, Yahusha said when they asked him how many times to forgive, 7 times, he said no, 70 times 7. So there's got to be something to that number that has a much deeper meaning. And I tried looking it up, just briefly to get a concept of what's being said. And I know this is not a complete understanding by any means, but supposedly it's a sacred number made up of factors of 2 perfect numbers, 7 representing perfection, and 10 completeness. 7 is the days it took for creation. 10, the 10 commandments, 10 words. So I thought there's got to be something really deep with that number. This little thing I looked up didn't, but I thought that was really interesting. If anybody's good with numbers or understanding the meanings, that would be just my 2 cents, sorry.
70, the year of Jubilee, 70 weeks, Daniel 70 weeks. Absolutely. There's definitely something prophetic encoded about the letter 7, the number 70. So yeah, we'll continue to look at that to get clear revelation on why. Because what's interesting about that count when it says 70, that doesn't include Joseph because he was already in Egypt. So when you add Joseph and his 2 kids, that's 73. So we can look at that as well. Brother Nate, thank you, sis.
Thank you.
So I found some pretty interesting. Brother Rod, Brother Emeka, JP, I sent you this. Emeka brought up a question here. I found a really good timeline. We can look at it in detail another time. But if you see here, everything is very well put together with scriptures on the timeline of the 400 years or the 430 years. And so if you're interested, brother, in a timeline study, take a look at this 4-page document that detailed, like very, very well put together with the scriptures. I just wanted to share that with the timeline. If anyone's questioning exactly who, when, where, the whole thing is all laid out. You can probably take a screenshot and see the address at the top here. So I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Yeah, no, that's a great tool. Appreciate it. You said you sent that to us?
I did. I sent
Okay.
it to Emeka and you, and then JP has it. If anyone else wants it, you can get it.
Great. Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely look at that. Because we want to, there are, different passages that have different numbers. Some say 400, some say 430. And there's different reasons why they say what they say. But the timeline with the scriptures to match is a very good tool. So yeah, let's definitely look at that. What else do we see? The first 11 chapters. I'm sorry, the first 11 verses of Exodus. I'm already in chapter 11 of Exodus. Brother Brian, praise Yah. Go ahead, brother.
Hey, Shalom. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I see like a perfect storm of like when we was looking in Genesis and you see like I see evidence of like although the Most High doesn't spell out his his law, like you don't see him spelling it out like he does in like Leviticus and the rest of the Torah. You see evidence that they knew, mankind knew what was expected of them. You see like Cain and Abel making sacrifices, Abraham doing sacrifices, giving Melchizedek a tenth of all he has. And you just down the line, you see this knowledge of Yah's law, and you never see Yah spelling it all out to them in Genesis, but it appears that they have this understanding. And when you look at the children of Israel in Mizraim, it seems like over time they lose their identity and they become assimilated in that, to a certain extent, in that pagan culture, to the point where they make their golden calf and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, it's interesting. And then at the same time, they have this new, like we're reading here, this new Pharaoh that knew not Joseph, knew not Yahuwah. And it's like, yeah, you're seeing that timing of them losing, sort of like losing their identity in a sense, like, and at the same time having a king over them that knows not Joseph or Yahuwah, and his heart is hardened. And at the same time, their hearts are being hardened as well, because they're slowly being assimilated into the Mitzrayim's culture. And it's a process when they leave Mitzrayim, that process of being restored, of being reacquainted with their first love, and Yah giving them, telling them what, explaining to them from ground zero, giving him his commandments, his law, his Torah. And that's something that I see that for the first time, it's like his law was always there from the beginning. His Torah was there from the beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, we read that he put the luminaries, the sun and the moon, there for appointed times and feasts and things. And so it was there from the beginning. But we see that mankind, over time, the heart of mankind becomes hardened and hardened and hardened, to the point where Yahuwah has to start from ground zero. And so I just find that interesting dynamic, and if that may have played a role, that gradual hardening and that assimilation of the children of Israel into that pagan culture, did that play a role in them becoming enslaved? So that's just something I was thinking about. But that's it.
You know, Brother Brian, very, very good point, because for two reasons. One, you know, when we look at, you know, the entrance of the written law, the giving of the written law, and we look at the things that Yahuwah was telling them not to do. If he had to tell them not to do it, it meant that they were doing it. You know, so we look at all of the things that they weren't supposed to do, right? And part of that was because of the buying into the culture that was around them. Also, too, the discouragement they had for the predicament they were in. You know, because you know they lost faith, you know they lost hope. They were looking for someone to deliver them out. You know, but one of the things that we should also be reminded of is that in Genesis, when we see Hasatan in the garden, and he tells Eve, Shawash, that you will be like gods. You will be God yourself, worshiping yourself. And every sin is self-centered. You know, every sin is tied into us having a thirst and a desire to please ourselves, and how all of those things lead into the way of the Egyptians, which they start to follow all the way up to the golden calf. So very good point. And we see that entered in Genesis. So great pull out, brother. What else do we see there before we move on? Oh, JP.
Just verse 11, I was looking at that and seeing how it says that, therefore they just set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. And I mean, I was just trying to look at the history of Ramses, and I see that there was, it's an interesting topic already, as we mentioned before about looking into the historical evidence of Ramses and who they were, and like as far as like, 'cause it seemed like there was two historically that people can look back onto, but what interested me the most, I think, was that the people, the Israelites, built these cities. You know what I mean? They built these cities, and so again, I think I'm looking at it from my daily standpoint today, and it's something that the people are doing today. Still, we're building these cities. You know what I mean? Like, I'm in America, I'm in California, and we're building these cities for our, taskmasters in a sense. You know what I mean? It's like, I was looking at it from that perspective. I know it's kind of vague, but it's like, that's what I still see is like, that bondage. And then so you can really see the second Exodus. You can really see it that. And so when we're in this place of bondage and we feel like we're like getting beat down by, the man or whatever, it's like, it's okay. Like, because we know that we are going to be taken from this in the sense of being freed, and we already are free. So even the people that were going through this trouble during this time, they were free. Those ones, because there was a remnant that knew, like, Yahuwah is gonna free us from this one day, and we just don't know when, and the day or the hour. So I just was kind of looking at it from that point. I know it's kind of real spiritual or like vague, but it's just exciting to always keep that in mind. You know what I mean? Not to get.
Absolutely. I think what you said in the beginning, as far as Ramses, Ramses is actually named after the city of Ramses, one with one less A, because his name just had one A, but he obviously wasn't yet in power as we come forth, because we look at the stories of, we look at I think the Ten Commandments movie and the cartoons, they all have Ramses as a pharaoh. Then he wouldn't have been until later. Ramses or the pharaoh then would have either been one of the Thutmoses, because there were three of them, or Amenhotep. And what's interesting is when we look into Moses, we'll see that he's named in accordance with the way the Egyptians were named. Amos, Thutmose, Moses. You know what I mean? It's an Egyptian name. So jumping ahead of myself though, but we got a couple more here. Sister Linda, and then Amy.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that pertaining to Ramses and Pithon also, I was on the same wavelength with Brother JP. And those treasure cities, I found it ironic that Joseph, he was the significant one that stored all from the beginning. He was the one that facilitated the whole storing process during the years of famine, and that's how he became so renowned and everything. And these two cities, Pithon and Ramses, it's ironic how then in the turnaround, the Yasharal was used to build two storehouse cities. These were storehouse cities. That word treasure means store cities or storehouse cities. So I thought that was very ironic. Interesting. Praise Yah.
Praise Yah. Yeah, that's consistent with what I've been reading too. Because they what's interesting about it, I'm reading out of this this history book. It says the new king fears the Israelites as a large, potential, dangerous fifth column in his land. So he enslaves the Israelites, forcing them to build the supply cities of Pithom and Ramses, and making their lives bitter with hard service. Right? So remember, the bitter herbs, as part of the Passover meal, was to remind them of the bitter time that they had to go through as well, right? So I thought that was interesting. Very good point, JP and Sister Linda. Amy.
Yeah, hi. No, I thought it was interesting as well what JP was saying before. Even today, in England, I know I can speak for England. It's very interesting that most streets in this country are named Saint Andrew, Saint Magnus, Father forgive me, all these names. And there's a scripture also that says, and forgive me, I didn't find it quick enough because I was doing Reuben food as well, but it says those who name their cities after themselves. It's very interesting. They name their cities after themselves and those they worship. And when you look at idolatry and the saints, the so-called saints, should I say, and you go back to looking in the Catholic and the whatever churches, or I can go to the Orthodox, religious Christian Orthodox. I know I was trapped in that. Well, when I say trapped, I didn't know any difference, but in Cyprus and Greece, they have every saint on the wall. They kiss the pictures, they're named after, every road is named after these apparent individuals who no longer breathe. And the Father speaks about this. He speaks about, we're meant to raise a city of Yahuah. I think there's also a scripture which says, my house is in ruins. Why you fix up your houses, and my house is in ruins. I think it's Malachi 4. In one of them, there's other places, and it's people are very quick to build up their houses, build up their thing, name everybody after them, and their sons after them, and then the streets after them, and then the cities after them, and it's crazy. It's like the Egyptians. That's what they did. They named everything after themselves. Buildings, even today, we have it. We have it today. It's the same, and that's what I'm saying. Back in Zephaniah, it speaks about the towers. Tear down your towers. These cities with these names on. Who are these people? Are they still alive? They're not. That's what Yahuwah is talking about. But Yahuwah never is living forever, so he should be upon us. Hence the name in our head and up on our forehead, and in our actions, in our hands, how we live, and then upon every building, if we get, which we will get our opportunity to build the city again and put Yahuwah's name all over it. And
it goes back into what Brian was talking about too earlier about the way of the Egyptians, how the lifestyle was infiltrated into them. They started to follow it. They remembered it. They desired it even. And how Hasatan said that to Eve, that you would be like God, that you would be like Elohim, and to understand what that means is to always be self-serving, to always serve oneself, to always look for what you desire most, because that's most important to you. It makes you selfish. Everything that I do is for me. It's for my needs. It's because it makes me feel good. It's because it's what I want. That is the core of sin. I will be like the Most High, the same thing that Hasatan did, wanting to be like the Most High. So we look at all these things and they all tie in together. So appreciate that, Sister Amy. But we're getting a glimpse here of what was going on, what was happening to the Israelites, right? So let's continue to read so we can continue to see the story unfold. Verse 12 to verse 22. Who wants to take that? Brother Nate.
There we go. It takes me a minute to get off mute there. Exodus 1:12 to 22. But the more they afflicted them, the more they increased and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Yisra'el. And the Mitzrites made the children of Yisrael serve with harshness, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in all kinds of work in the field. All their work which they had made them to do with harshness. Then the sovereign of Mitzrayim spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew woman and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared Elohim and did not do as the sovereign of Mitzrayim commanded them, and kept the male children alive. So the sovereign of Mitzrayim called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and kept the male children alive? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Mitzrayim women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. So Elohim was good to the midwives, and the people increased and became very numerous. And it came to be, because the midwives feared Elohim, that he provided households for them. And Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, throw every son who is born into the river, and keep alive every daughter.
Praise Yah. What you see there, brother?
Well, there's a lot of obvious stuff here of types and shadows, and I'll let other people get into that. I'll maybe pick on something here that might be overlooked. That word, well, no, it's not. Puah, splendid. I was looking in Exodus 1:15. There, I believe it's in Genesis. It looks to be spelled maybe a little bit different here, but ending in pei, wa, hey. But I see pei, wa, ayin, hey. But I believe it's also possibly spelled in another area also. The father's name, wa, hey. I use this in Genesis. I think it's 48:15 in another spot. Puah, that his name ends in ah. Yahuah, but there's an ayin in there, so I'll just stick to the ones in Genesis. But yeah, I see types and shadows of Messiah, and I'll let other people elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I see something in verse 19. No, sorry. Verse 17, it says, but the midwives feared Elohim and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. Verse 18, so the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said, and then he asked them. But then he makes an edict later and says, all people, shall do this. So this is a good place to really understand, the time for civil disobedience. So we are to be civil, we are to obey the law of the land unless it supersedes the law of Yahuah. Understand that. Very important for us to see that, specifically as we look at the times now, what we're entering into, the beginning of labor pains. There's going to come a time where when we disobey civil law, we will be put to death because we are obeying the Father. We look at Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They disobeyed civil law because it superseded what Yah was telling them, and they didn't do that. So we have to be mindful that even here, the midwives, not really knowing whether they were Hebrew or Egyptian, I would say they were probably Hebrew because they understand who Elohim was, obeyed him rather than obeying Pharaoh. We have to be mindful that that time could come in our lifetime where we have to make a decision, whether it's obey the law of the land and live, or obey the Yahuah who has saved us, and possibly die or be delivered. You know, there's always hope there, but we always obey him. So, and that time is easy right now, but it might get hard. You know, so we got to be mindful of that. We're, you know, because we're Hebrew, because we follow God's law, statutes, and judgments, because we keep his Sabbath, doesn't mean that we won't be persecuted. Doesn't mean that we won't be dealt with harshly, that we won't have remembrances of bitterness, you know, all throughout scripture. That's what the Israelites had to endure. So we got to be mindful of that. Mecca's had his hand up for a while, then JP, and then Amy, and then Brother Don.
Yeah, you know, just one thing I found interesting is that, you know, this new Pharaoh didn't know Joseph, didn't know Yosef or his ways, you know, which is very interesting because Joseph left counsel for, you know, Pharaoh. He was Pharaoh's advisor, and anyone that would have known Joseph would have, you know, we see that there was no issues or problems going on in Mitzrayim up until this harsh affliction that they placed on Yasharal. So it's very interesting because, you know, knowing that this one didn't know Joseph, it means that the previous Pharaoh would have known Joseph, you know, whoever was changed in between that time period and maybe, you know, a Pharaoh after, you know, the Pharaoh that Joseph had dealt with would have known him. But it got to a period where this Pharaoh didn't know Joseph, didn't know the counsel that he gave Pharaoh, you know, the Pharaoh that preceded him. And so I thought that was very interesting because now you see, okay, you're moving away from the righteous guidance and counseling to, you know, that was given. You can see this more wicked nature coming now arising, you know, in the heart of Pharaoh. So I thought that was, you know, that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we also see how Yahuwah's hand is in this all the way through. How there is someone whose heart is hardened. You know, later we read that Yah actually hardened Pharaoh's heart to usher in the course of actions that happen after. You know, so he's the conductor here, you know, at all times. So that is the reason we have to be fixed on him. That is the reason we have to have faith in him, because there are going to be things that happen in the course of our walk that we don't understand why and what for, but it's because he's bringing in a following course of actions that lead to his will. So we see that happen here with the pharaohs that come in. Very good point, Omeka. The epic of time had changed. The ways of Yahuwah through Joseph were no longer recognized. You know, whether it be disconnect from the passing on of knowledge, or whether that meant that the Hyksos kings came in and swallowed up what was going on in Egypt. However, like we talked about earlier, this Pharaoh did not recognize or know not just Joseph, but the way of Joseph. That's what's most important. The way of Joseph, Yosef. So, JP, then Don, and no, JP, then Amy. Oh, JP, you don't want to go no more?
I mean, I was just looking at how you know, it says in the beginning portions that they feared Elohim, and because of the fear of Elohim, because they listened or they kept his, you know, word. It says in 20 that Elohim dealt well with the midwives, and then in 21 he made them houses. Yeah, and it just kind of to me it was like the significance of you keeping his commandments, guarding his ways, and following him and putting him first. How he, he's the one who keeps you and guards you and protects you. And so I don't know, I just looked at it from that angle. I thought it was amazing to see it like that. As I've seen it right now, how the midwives, how they were like we should be, so in that kind of context, so.
Yeah, I think it's very, very vital that you pointed out, and I'm glad you did, how Yah provided for their households, provided for them and probably everyone around them, and as a witness. Because like we said, sometimes we obey unto death, but sometimes we obey and there is life extended and even blessings surrounding that would even further lift up his name. So just because it looks bleak, like if I disobey this, I'm going to die. No, maybe not. Maybe he's going to lift you up. Maybe he's going to come in the lion's den. Maybe he's going to come in that fiery furnace and take you out. So they serve Yahuah. Whatever they doing, give me some of that. So we always have to make sure that we obey him because we don't know the outcome. We're a part of his continuing Torah. This is what we read about. We get up, we get with the Father and all the believers and all the angels. They might be saying, nah, see, in the book of Elohim, JP, he such thus and so. You know what I mean? It could happen that way. Just as our stories in our lives are unrolled. Now, obviously, I'm paraphrasing and making light of our lives, but at the same time, when we overcome, there's rejoicing going on in the Shamayim. So we got to be mindful of that, how our victories are rejoiced over. So praise Yah. Good point, brother. Yeah, don't ever put your hand down, brother. You got it up, keep it up. We need to hit. No, just mess with. Rick? Oh no. All right. So Amy, then Donald, then Nate, and then Brian.
Yeah, I gotta be in there somewhere. I keep putting my hand up, but
I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry.
Electronic one, I just.
Right. Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead, and then Amy,
Amazing.
and then we'll sort it out after that.
AP snuck in there somehow, I mean, he wanted to talk earlier, now he wants to talk. I'm just kidding. Anyways, I keep this brief because it's all about the Aleph Tavs for me in this section, because these things are. You guys check this out. That's all I can say. All right, let's see here. So the very first one we're talking about in this section appears in the chapter 13, where it says, "In Mitzrayim made Aleph Tav the children of Yasharal to serve with rigor." And then the next one, it says, "And then made Aleph Tav their lives bitter." Interesting placement on that one, as you guys have been talking about bitter and how that's a primary aspect of this, where we see a covenant symbol that's there just before that that statement. And then as it goes on, in all manner of service in the field, Aleph Tav all their service. So he's using this covenant that I see here with the Mitzrayim for certain aspects here that are very interesting. It's like almost bringing, this people under even more, if you will, because of this covenant somehow. And then as we see in 16, and then when you do the office of the midwife to Aleph Tav, the ivorous woman, which is now going in to protect the men or the children, as we'll see here in 17, where it's the place, but the midwives feared Aleph Tav Elohim, of course, as he goes on, and not the king of Mitzrayim commanded them, but saved Aleph Tav, the men, children alive. So we see that covenant there to protect the children, the young men during this time. And he used the midwives to do so. So there was that, and then we get into 18 where it says, "And why do you do this thing and have saved the left child, the men and children alive?" So there's that question about why is this covenant here that you saved these men, and of course we understand why as we continue into this story. Yeah. And then on 21, and it came to pass when the midwives feared the left of Elohim that he made them houses. So we see how these placements of the left tab, where he's interjecting like himself into here to say, hey, I got to make this happen, and boom, and it's dealing with that aspect that to make their lives bitter. That's interesting. And then as they leave out, as we know, the bitter herbs and all of those type of things to bring them in remembrance to this covenant aspect that he's made here to be placed upon them, so that they would remember, so they would continue to remember, to pass this on. So it was something that it was a covenant that to remind them of the covenant. It's like that. It's astonishing. I was excited. I had to jump in here. I'm sorry.
Nah, in no way do we want to hold that excitement back, brother. Yeah, we want to let that out.
Yeah.
He, and like you said, he made that a part of his Moedim. You know what I mean? That we remember forever. And it's just like, how do we not do something that he said, do this in remembrance of this? We have to continue to do it. It's a constant reminder. Wow, we got a full house of hands here. I think Amy was next, then Donald, then Brian, then Nate, then June, then Emeka. All right. I'll keep watch. I got it.
It's funny the way you have to list all them. Okay, I'm gonna go to a beautiful scripture. We're gonna go Yeshayahu 44, verse 3 to verse 8. Oof, this is so good. It says, "For I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my ruach upon thy seed, and my barakah blessing upon thine offspring. And they shall spring up as among the grass, as willows by the watercourses. One shall say, I am Yahuwah's, and another shall call himself by the name of Yaakov, and another shall subscribe with his hand onto Yahuwah, and surname himself by the name Yisra'el. Thus saith Yahuwah, sovereign of Yasharal, and his Redeemer, Yahweh Tsabaoth. I am the first, and I am the last. Aleph Tav, I guess, would be there in the Hebrew. And beside me there is no Al. And who, as I, shall call and shall declare it, and set it in order for me, since I appoint the ancient people, and the things that are coming and shall come, let them show unto them. Fear ye not, neither be afraid. Have not I told thee from that time, and have declared it? Ye are even my witnesses. Is there a Al beside me? Yea, there is no Al. I know not any. Wow. So there we're told the name that his people will use, not naming their streets after anybody, not naming them. They shall call themselves after the name of Yahuwah, Jacob, or Israel.
Praise Yah.
Mind-blowing, amazing.
Praise Yah.
That excites my bones.
Yeah.
Fire shot up in me bones. I'm twitching on me seat here.
Cool. Praise Yah, sis.
I'm trying to have self-control, but I'm finding difficulty.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Great passage. Brother Don.
Yes, as I was listening to a lot, we have to suffer for the namesake of our Heavenly Father, and said, do in remembrance of me, just like everyone else have to do in remembrance of him. That there are going to be those that are sent by Hashatan himself that try to take us down or come up against us, and only way we can come out victorious is with something. We have to go through something before we can get through to come out victorious, but knowing that we have faith. Like the midwives, they had faith. and all of what they went through, they still had faith in Yahuwah. And we must have that same faith, because we're going to go through something if it comes to death. But he won't put no more than we can bear. But to know that we would die for what we believe in and our master, he will bring us out. But he wants us to know that we will go all out to even come down to die for him, just like Yahusha, even though Yahusha wasn't even in the flesh back then. But then when he became flesh, look what he went through and died. So we have to suffer persecution always, and knowing that we had a faith and still believe. And like you said, it can come to death in the laws of the land. But still, it may even kill you, or he may put you up in a position where you don't went through. Once he put you up, you get the glory out of it. He move you to another position to you can teach someone else that what you went through. If he brought me through it, he could bring you through it. Praise Yah.
Praise Yah. Praise Yah. They overcame the evil one by the blood of the Lamb and the power of their testimony.
Hallelujah.
Brother Brian.
Yeah, shalom, shalom. Yeah, it's, yeah, these midwives. Yeah, I was just like, yeah, they're totally like, they're filled. There's a powerful testimony of how we are to be, to stand for truth and righteousness and to fear God rather than man. And I was thinking about there's an organization. It's called in America here, as we all know, many churches and things, they have what's called 501c3 status, which gives them a tax exempt status. And there's an organization that many pastors are part of in America. It's called the Clergy Response Team. And what that is an organization that is the government has organized many pastors, and they're a part of, and they're basically used and they're trained to basically in times of emergency or whatever, they're trained to basically have their congregation submit themselves to the government using Romans 13, chapter 13, that talks about submitting yourselves to the government and all that kind of stuff. And it's like it's a way of it can be used out of context, because like you said, when the government, we are to obey the laws, but when the laws contradict Yahuwah's Torah, then that is where the line should be drawn, and that's when we are to stand for righteousness and truth. And so I just found that interesting, that yeah, we are living in those times where some of these bodies pastors may be compromised to the point where they may be manipulating their congregations to submit to laws that are not according to Yah's Torah. And those are things that people need to be aware of if you're members organizations with this 501c3 status and things, because it's we're living in those times of deception, and like the scripture says, that Hasatan comes as an angel of light and a minister of righteousness. And so people need to be aware. So that's just something that in our modern times, because when I look at this is an example, like the scripture said that he in Hebrews, it talks about how he gives the Torah as an example to us of things that happen to Yisra'el, and nothing's new under the sun. And so history's repeating itself, and everything. So that's all I wanted to bring out.
Nah, very good point, brother. Anytime, we can shed light on, what is prophetically being spoken in scripture and lining it up to what we are dealing with at the present is always good instruction, so absolutely. The interesting thing about the 501c, they'll cripple those organizations that they're tied to if they don't do what they say. So it begins the imploring of those leaders to get people to do what the government wants, like he just said. So good point. Because they're bound by the laws of the 501c, or they don't get funded, you know.
And it's like I think there's like over. I did a search on Google. I think it's like over 1.6 million pastors in America that's a part of that clergy response team under 501c3. So if your church is a 501c, most likely your pastor is a member of this response team, more than likely. So it's like beware if you. So it's like, yeah, it's definitely an interesting time. Like the scripture says, fear not him that could destroy the body, but fear him that could destroy the body and the soul.
Yeah. So and just for clarity, and so everyone knows, we are not a part of the clergy response team here at Assembly of Yahuah. We are not. Praise Yah. Brother Nate, and then June, and then Ameka.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I have something else I was going to share, but while we're on that topic, if you look at the reign of terror in 1793, the summer of 1793 to 1794, during the French Revolution, they did a similar thing to where they I forget the name of the document, but they made the clergy all sign a document that they had to sign allegiance to the new Republic of France, and renounce their power to the Pope. And it caused a big upheaval and a rift, but they concealed it very well over here in this country's legal system, so that people have done the same thing, but they're not even aware that they essentially signed themselves over to the government or the beast, or however you want to look at that kingdom, you know, that's there. But it kind of goes along with my comment I was going to share. I was going to go back to verse 8 of Exodus. You know, the sovereign new sovereign arose who did not know Joseph. It reminded me of the the women's study did a study on Samson this week, and so JP was studying, and then I was studying with JP, so I was looking at the Samson, and it kind of reminds me a little bit about. I'm going to kind of like maybe connect a couple things here. We talked like the other week about Genesis 15, 16, talking about the crookedness of the Amorites is not yet complete, or the sins of the Amorites is not yet complete. And so I find it kind of interesting, connecting with the Samson reference. That the Philistines at that time were essentially in a system of authority, similar how the Egyptians were in a system of authority, and similar how today the system here is in a system of authority. And so it says in Judges 14, 4, that it says that his mother and father did not know that it was of Yahuah, speaking of Samson taking a Philistine wife, or making a covenant, or getting connected with the enemy. I find it interesting that the Exodus, that Yahuah allows his people to go into Mitzrayim, and they're essentially kind of mixing, if you will, or there is some level that's going on. Eventually his people are called out and defined as set apart, but it definitely seems that Yahuah allowed that and brought that in, and then to kind of bring judgment on Mitzrayim, similar to how Samson brought judgment on the Philistines, similar how the second great Exodus is going to bring judgment on the rulers of this world. And so even though we are living here, and they were living in Egypt, and the Yasharalites were Yasharalim, I guess, we're living in the land with the Philistines. One of the mistakes that Samson made was, even though he took a Philistine wife, he didn't read the signs. He couldn't see. It's interesting, he got his eyes poked out later on, but he couldn't see the signs that he was essentially getting undermined, or that there was mischief going on when he got with that woman. So it's good for us to be aware that even though we're here, that we need to be aware that these people are covenant breakers. They always get what they want. But then when it comes time to give you what their end of the bargain is, there's always an excuse why that doesn't happen. And so just to kind of keep that in mind so that we don't repeat the same mistakes as maybe Samson or other of those in the past that have been mixed and are forced to be in another system, but also to remember that we also need to stay guarded from that.
Yeah, I mean, you see it continue on through Scripture. I mean, Solomon, comes to mind as he started to take on the ways of the wives that he brought in, or that were brought to him in some instances. But yeah, very good point. June?
Shalom. Earlier, Emeka brought out verse 8, and that was a verse Nate just spoke about too. And it is interesting how it says that the sovereign rose up who did not know Joseph. One reason that was interesting to me is, you look in books like Ezra where King Darius received a letter about something that happened in history, and they pulled up all the archives and they read, to refresh everyone's mind what had happened a long time ago. And even in the book of Esther, there was a lot of things recorded, and when the king wanted to remember, well, who was it that helped me out that day? And that's when, Mordecai's name came up, and then he got honored for something he did way back when that was recorded in history. And so it's kind of interesting that, do you think, they weren't recording things back then, the Egyptians, or they just plumb forgot? They had no clue why these people were in their land. It just seems very interesting that he rose up and had no clue whatsoever about Joseph, and that nobody consulted the history archives and checked out the people, where the history of the people being there, because there was a point in time they weren't there and they came. That was just interesting.
Yeah, you don't want an answer to that though. It's just I don't know what they would have thought. I don't know what was missing from history so that they wouldn't know. Because you said, do you think? So is it rhetorical?
Yeah, I'm just sharing.
Okay. No, I was just saying, sweat beads are coming down because I can't answer my wife. You know what I mean? That's not a normal thing. But, hey.
I was just sharing a thought about, but all Yahuah orchestrates everything, so maybe something happened along the way, and they just had no idea about.
Well, I mean, I think what added to the way they felt about the Israelites was the fact of what they immediately saw. They saw them growing. They saw the people around that were trying to attack them. Those things that they came up in their mind were things that they physically saw. They saw that there could potentially be a serious problem here with these people that weren't of them, so they, didn't have recollection of the Yahuah and the people of the Israelites, of Joseph. So, but Mecca, and then Nate again.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because we see here Pharaoh's commands to first the midwives, and then we see his command to his people after. And just thinking about today's time, for those that believe that, African Americans are the descendants of the children of Israel or the tribes of Judah. Even here in the United States, we see a lot of Planned Parenthoods and abortion clinics in these neighborhoods, where they're predominantly minorities, and those that would be, of the scattered tribes. And I think it's very interesting, just the similarities, even looking into the other, all minorities and nationalities, to see where those for those that believe, that they've gone through, seeing connections between them and the curses, being the people of Israel, that, that's kind of what's going on today. Like, there is a agenda to depopulate, these people. There's an agenda, and you see them, I even heard, about how they purposely, I'm forgetting her name. The woman who was behind the creation of Planned Parenthood. What is it? Something Singer, I think.
Yeah. You watching your boy Issachar? He did it. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, Margaret
Singer. Yeah. Yeah, and so, just to see that there is just to see those targeting, these communities, to depopulate. And now, even up to the point in the United States, they've made abortion legal, even up to the point after the baby is born. That's not abortion anymore. That's called murder. Like, they are murdering children the same way Pharaoh was taking, these kids and throwing them into a lake or, a fire, the river, wherever they were throwing them into the river. But that's essentially murder. And that's the same thing that they're doing today. And they're targeting these people, and they're, it's pretty much murder what they're committing. So I definitely see a connection between, the United States being, and not just the United States, but, you look at the world in general, this is going around, all over the world, so I definitely see a connection between, that bondage, and the world being almost looked at as Mitzrayim, as Egypt being in bondage, and this cruelty lining up with, what we see Pharaoh doing here in Exodus.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some parallels to be drawn there, but I think, we definitely have to, be mindful that there's always a consistent and a pointed process to stopping the line, whether it be Moshe, whether it be even Yahusha with Herod. There was a concerted effort to stop Yah's people. So we have to always keep that in mind. Good stuff, brother. Or should I thank Issachar? I'm just messing with you. Brother Nate, then Amy, and Mecca was trying to speak up. Brother Nate, Brother Nate, Sister Amy, and then Sister Poppy.
I'm just going to mention on Sister June's comment there. I think that, there's nothing new under the sun. We see a repeating history. If anyone's seen Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, we see that there's evidence that during the famine time, Pharaoh had took a stranglehold on the land. In the scriptures talk about this too. Genesis 47, I believe. The land, all the money, the animals, the people, moved everyone into the cities. And so it made Pharaoh this superpower. So, but then we see like today history gets like changed, and I would say that if anything, that says Pharaoh did not know Joseph, I would say that history, or they tried to rewrite history, because we see that with the Roman, whenever one Caesar overthrows another Caesar, or maybe a Pharaoh comes into power, there's ever evidence when one Pharaoh would come into power, they would erase or try to erase the history of the dynasty before it and try to set themselves up as higher. And so I would say, if anything, that we probably see that a bunch of misinformation was most likely given to the people about about how they got this power, rewriting history as the generations forget, so that they can justify, essentially the theft of the people that had happened, and we see that like today with different tribes coming from the African continent, the European, the Asian continent, coming over here and building this nation, and turning it into a power. And then, in 1871 at the Organic Act of Columbia, when DC was created, and then slowly and surely, took the power, given Social Security numbers, Federal Reserve, and is basically the Egypt event, in slower, spread out through decades of taking all the power from the people, and then giving it to the hegemony state, in DC. It's the same thing. So if anything, I'd say back then history was probably altered so that they could justify their actions of what they were doing.
Wow, that was an exhaustive answer to that question. I think there's definitely truth to, those who write history are those who are in power. You know what I mean? So, we definitely see that now. So according to that answer, I would say, that's a strong possibility that, the history of the Israelites and how they came into Egypt is a strong possibility, so that Pharaoh would not have known. So, does that answer your question, Jim? Or at least point you in the right direction? Or are you even more confused? Or no, I'm just messing.
Nah, just enjoying the discussion.
Okay, cool. Thanks, brother. And when I say exhaustive, it wasn't I'm saying like you went above and beyond to explain, which is a good thing because it leaves no question to what you're actually saying. So
Strong's exhaustive concordance. I got it, brother.
The Nates, I would say, but yeah. Good stuff. Amy and then Poppy, and after those two, all right, let's do that. Amy and then Poppy.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to share about, when you're speaking about before with the cases, I find it interesting. You can see all over the world these cases now, I think in the New Covenant, it speaks of, the women shall be wanting to be with women, men will be looking for men. This is part of the cases as well. And when you look at the earth today, this is what the people all over the place are actually doing. Even members of my own physical family, they do this same thing in the cases and the sicknesses. And, I was just reading Deuteronomy 28, a little bit there in verse 64. It says, and Yahuah will scatter you among all the nations from one end of the earth to the other. There you will worship other gods, other mighty ones of wood and stone, and neither you nor your ancestors have known. What I find interesting with this, it says you'll find no resting place for the sole of your foot. You'll have anxiety and anxious mind. Eyes will be weary with longing, despairing of heart. You will live in constant suspense, filled with dread, both night and day. Never sure of your life. And that's like, whoa, that's kind of like, you look at people today. I've even heard people recently say, how do you get rid of your anxiety, Amy? These are people who don't believe, people who are still out in the world. And it's like, well, I don't have to get rid of it because Abba Father's just, it's not there anymore. I don't have, I don't have that, which is, it's interesting because we see amongst people now all over the world, that you can see the cases amongst every single person, whether it be north, east, south, or west, wherever color skin they are. You can see that these people who are with women, men who are with men, that there's the cases of Yahuah is on them, and they're still not relenting. And you get someone super rebellious and they still carry on and they don't care. I mean, one said to me the other day, who I love dearly, his family members, they'll always be a lesbian, and I'm like, I just, you don't know what to say. It's like,
one of the things you mentioned there is that you said the new covenant, so I'm assuming you meant Romans.
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at that real quick, because a lot of people misinterpret what's being said here. So verse 18, Romans chapter 1, verse 18 says, "For the wrath of Elohim is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of Elohim is manifest in them, for Elohim has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew Elohim, they did not glorify him as Elohim, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changing the glory of the incorruptible Elohim into a made like corruptible image of man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore Elohim also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of Elohim for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, Elohim gave them up to the vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use for what was against nature. Likewise, also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, with men committing what is shameful and receiving in themselves the penalty of the error which was due. Right? And then it goes on to explain all of those things. But the key phrase there, the key verse there, is they denied him as creator. So when you deny, because people look at this passage and say that it's talking about homosexuality. And although homosexuality is mentioned, lesbianism is mentioned, the key point is that they denied him as creator. And when you deny him as creator, everything else fails. Who you are, you can make yourself up to whoever you want to be now, so you can do this. You can be with another woman. You can be with another man, because you have taken away the option of there being a creator and there being purpose in your life. And that is what he was talking about, in that they remove that. You see him remove it from the books. You see him remove it from what's taught in schools. You have the theory of evolution and all these things. But the key point of the passage is that they removed Elohim, and he allowed them to go after what they wanted, go after what they desired. Their minds, when it says reprobate mind, became minds that did no longer function as a mind should. Basically, they became insane. And when they became insane, all of the things they did were insane. So,
I just wanted to share it because I know for me, as a testimony in my life, I had a reprobate mind. So for the people out there who are watching this, who do or are in that place, there is Abba Father can redeem, because he redeemed me, because I had a reprobate mind and I was handed over in every way, shape, and form. And this is the thing with, you know, they save themselves, they save the creature. That's what I see. They became as animals. In, you know, I think the book of Jude speaks of it and says, and calls them indecent beasts who have no control over themselves. I think it's the Jude 1 speaks about those same ones, and these are handed over to basically handed over to the enemy, that people call the Hashatan, you know, to be persecuted. And, you know, it's kind of interesting because we also see Shaul also had a form of authority to hand over, I think it was Apollos and the other person, to be chastised because of their blasphemy against the Father, and he was chastised and handed them over to Hashatan, you know, to chastise and persecute them, which is very interesting. I mean, I can say, because I seen the cases on my life, I seen them in my life, and I couldn't change. My mind at the time was just totally gone, you know. And right. But he still redeemed me. He still took me up and has trained me ever since. And now it's like, when people see me now, they're like, you know, that's Amy that used to be locked up in mental homes. Yeah. You know, nuts, always fighting, drinking, using drugs. I just had no concept of anything. I didn't know the difference between the left or the right. And he had passion on me and mercy, and that's another powerful thing that is. I just wanted to share that with people who are watching. Who are going to go.
I mean, that's very, very necessary when you have a personal experience to share it, because it becomes alive to you. It's not just words, you lived it. So very good. And what I was trying to show also within your testimony was that sin is a downward spiral, because once you deny the Creator, everything else is possible. There's nothing to tie you to truth if you deny Him first. So they suppressed the truth as a lie, which was Him as Creator. Praise God. Thanks for sharing your testimony too. Poppy, and then Sister Nisha had her hand up.
May I circle back to what Miss June brought up? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I believe what Brother Nate, I can't pronounce what's on my screen. I'm sorry.
Nate's fine.
Okay. I think that's a very plausible explanation for the worldly perspective of it. But when she asked it, I was thinking, and I'm not trying to discredit or discount, because I really liked his answer. It expanded my mind a little bit. Right. But I was thinking more of like the hieroglyphics and how they made statues and they wrote everything. And at times such as then, when Joseph was there and the 7 years of famine, then the 7 years of plenty, and then the 7 years of famine, and then leading to Pharaoh basically having complete control over the whole world that he could reach. There was going to be some pictures. There was going to be some documentation. There was going to be some history about all that. And so I was thinking, you know, either from the perspective spiritually, Yah took that away, just like he hardened his heart. Yeah. But just like he hardened his heart for Yah's purpose, he removed that and didn't know him. And then combined with Pharaoh said they were gods. They became gods. You know, they were gods to the people. So his pride and arrogance and elevating himself to being a god, Yah could, you know, gave him that opportunity to, okay, you're it. I'm taking my people out. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid point, because when we started in the very beginning, we talked about that, how Yah used the oppression. He used the people. He put things in place to funnel them through deliverance, you know. And, you know, when you talk about the history, one of the things that I was showing, a picture I just showed you, this book provides historical hieroglyphs and drawings that match the time of the biblical account. So that's absolutely right. I didn't even think about that when June asked the question, but that makes sense. You know, the history was there. You know, the history was undeniable. And although I do believe that, you know, there's some accuracy to what Nate said about some things being changed, there are hieroglyphs. There was actually was fun. You know what's funny about what you just said? June and I's first date was at the Archaeological Museum at the University of Pennsylvania. That was our first date. And we probably weren't looking at the artifacts that day. We were probably looking at each other, so we probably missed, you know, some of the things. But in that, there was a King Tut memorial history, and it had people taking grains to a storehouse that was of that time, which would have shown the time of the famine. So you're absolutely right. The history was there, but he hardened the heart of that particular Pharaoh not to recognize Joseph. But I do think there's some truth to also what Nate was saying, not to discount that. I think both of those ideas coincide and clearly give an answer there. Thank you, Sister Poppy. That was very, very good. Very, very good information, and reminded me about the book that I was telling you guys about earlier, because all of that stuff is in there. And I'm sitting here looking at it. I'm like, here's a picture right here, you know. So praise Yah, praise Yah. Sister Nisha had her hand up, but it was a long time up. So maybe you still had something to say, sis, before I move on to someone else?
Go, Sister Nisha.
All right. So Mecca, and then Mecca, if you don't mind, I'd like to go to Nate, because I think he has something to say about what was just said. I presume. Nate, if you do not, let's let Mecca go.
I do, and it's really short. I was just going to say, you know, you have to be aware of kind of like the psyop, if you will, the psychological operation that the enemy does. You know, because we're talking about history, just really briefly. It's like a point of fascination. Is like truth, or actually, you know, the time. It's like a white canvas, and truth is like a splatter on the canvas, and you can't ever get that down. The enemy understands that. So you can cover it up, but time has a way to flake the cover up, and then you can kind of see the cracks begin to show, and then you can kind of see that it was covered up. So the enemy does that still, but then what they do now, and this is the day and age that we're in now, is pretty advanced enemy stuff, is that they now will throw other splatters on the wall, you know what I mean, like retrospect, so that you don't know which one is truth. They got some stuff covered up, so you don't see it. Things are flaking away, but like it's still difficult to kind of understand. But then there's a bunch of other patterns on the canvas, and so it's difficult to know which one's the authentic pattern, because the enemy will get you. He'll get you on truth. He like, truth, yes, truth, and then come on over here, truth, and you're like, yes, truth, and then he steps into the lie, and you don't realize it yet, and he's like, truth, but it's lie, and then you say yes, truth, because the other two were truth, so this one must be true too. So that's kind of like where we're in. It's really advanced stuff that the enemy does, and it makes it a real mess. So I just kind of wanted to point that out, that yeah, I'm sure that they're aware, and that they can't fully rewrite things, and so what they do is just write a bunch of nonsense, and it makes it difficult to know what is correct. But Yahuah, you know, is revealing, and he will bring us out. So
Oh yeah, there's definitely you know, the adversary being an author of confusion, so that definitely ties in and makes sense. So absolutely, brother. Great discussion we're having here. Mecca will be it for chapter 1. Go ahead, brother. You there? All righty.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello? Okay.
Well, you shut off. There you go.
All right. All right. So yeah, what I was gonna bring out is that, you know, if we look at the reason why Pharaoh had, you know, taken these measures, it was because of their growth, you know, and the fact that he thought that they were going to rise up against him, you know, against the Mitzrayim, you know, or join their enemies. You know, is what was in his mind, that they were going to join their enemies. And so I really, you know, think that beyond history, even if he had the history and looked at history, that wasn't his focal point. His focal point were, look, they're outnumbering us. If we have anybody who wants to, you know, attack us, they may go to them and seek them to help them, you know. And so because he didn't understand that relationship between Joseph, you know, and the preceding Pharaoh, then he definitely was looking at this in a different concept, as, oh, these people are getting vast, you know, they are growing vastly, and we, you know, they are a threat to us, you know. And so his heart was set on trying to eliminate a threat versus looking at history to see that, oh, these people did us well, you know, their fathers, you know, their fathers did us well, and helped us, you know, pretty much escape a famine, you know. That's not what they were looking at. He was now looking at, these people may join our enemies to overtake us. And so I just wanted to bring that out.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah. I apologize. I missed the last part of what you said because I had to take care of something. But I did catch the part about, you know, the reasoning behind their thought process, Pharaoh's thought process, and why. And I think that's very important for us to remember that was part of it. You know, they were very fruitful and they multiplied, and all of that was the growth of the nation that eventually, you know, was under bondage. So this was a necessary process, even if they were doing everything the right way that Yahuwah saw fit for the people. So we have to be mindful of Yahuwah's will. So praise Yah. This concludes our Exodus chapter study, Exodus chapter 1. Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom, Akuti, and Brohim. Thank you so much for viewing this video. We hope it was helpful to your walk in the truth. Remember to always search the scriptures on your own, to study Abba's word and show yourself approved, according to 2 Timothy 2:15. We invite you to study with us. To join us in a live study, just go to our website at assemblyofyahuah.com and click the Join Us tab. We have something available Wednesday through Saturday of every week. If you've been Baruch or blessed by this video today or any other study, we encourage you to go to the Giving tab on our website. Our elders all have their own ways of income, so none of the giving or proceeds go to them. Instead, it goes to biblical assembly needs. We also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss any new videos. We sincerely pray that Abba continues to direct your path as you acknowledge Him in all your ways. Much avaha, and again, shalom.